The desert night was alive with silence, broken only by the crunch of boots pressing into the dry earth. A Navy SEAL team moved like shadows, a line of disciplined ghosts drifting across hostile terrain under the cover of moonlight. Their formation was tight, each man scanning his sector, each movement rehearsed through years of relentless training. The mission was classified, so classified that only their commander and a handful of officers back at headquarters knew the full scope. What the team did know was enough to make every heartbeat sharpen into focus. American hostages were trapped inside a militant compound, and their window for rescue was quickly closing. The compound lay just beyond the ridge, surrounded by mud brick walls and watchtowers manned by restless guards. Intelligence suggested the militants were heavily armed and prepared to execute the hostages if threatened. The SEALs had been briefed to expect resistance, but intelligence often painted a cleaner picture than reality. On the ground, the truth was usually bloodier. Their commander, Lieutenant Harris, crouched low, raising a hand to halt the team. He peered through night vision goggles, studying the compound's layout. The hostages were believed to be kept in a central structure, a makeshift barracks converted into a prison. The plan was simple in theory: silent infiltration, quick extraction, and controlled exfil before dawn broke. Simplicity, however, had no place in war. "Check sectors," Harris whispered into his headset. His voice was calm, the kind of calm that came from knowing nerves were contagious. One by one, the SEALs signaled clear. The path seemed open, but experience had taught them that the most dangerous moments often came when everything appeared too easy. Still, time was against them. Harris gave the hand signal, and the team slithered forward like vipers closing in on prey. As they reached the compound's perimeter, explosives expert Petty Officer Ramirez knelt by the wall. With practiced efficiency, he set a shaped charge, a small pop that would be enough to breach without alerting half the countryside. The men took their positions, weapons raised, breathing slow. A muted explosion cracked the wall, dust rising like smoke. In seconds, they were inside. The first enemy guard barely had time to register movement before a suppressed round dropped him. Another guard turned the corner, only to meet the same fate. The SEALs moved swiftly, systematically clearing the compound's outer structures. Their training turned them into machines of precision. One team clearing, another covering, each man trusting the others with his life. Inside the main building, they found the hostages. Huddled together in fear, their faces streaked with dirt and fatigue, the captives barely believed rescue had come. The SEAL medic quickly assessed them, whispering reassurance while checking for injuries. Harris radioed back the code word, "Package secure." Relief briefly flickered through the team. The hardest part, however, was never getting in. It was getting out. That's when the first shot rang out. It wasn't one of theirs. The sharp crack of a rifle echoed from the ridgeline, followed by a flood of gunfire from the perimeter. Floodlights blazed to life, illuminating the compound like a stage. The enemy had been waiting. Contact left. Multiple hostiles. Barked Chief Petty Officer Donovan as he returned fire. Bullets tore into the walls, sending shards of mud and stone flying. The SEALs dragged the hostages to cover, their carefully crafted silence shattered into chaos. Harris cursed under his breath. Intelligence had been wrong. This wasn't a poorly defended outpost. This was a trap. The militants poured in from every angle, their weapons blazing, their voices rising in guttural shouts. The SEALs responded with lethal precision, but for every hostile they dropped, 2 more appeared. Ammunition began to drain quickly, the advantage of stealth long gone. The walls that had offered concealment now boxed them in, turning the compound into a kill zone. Pinned behind crumbling walls, Harris tried to calculate options. Exfiltration routes were cut off. Air support was out of range. Communication lines crackled with static. The enemy was jamming their signals. They were cut off, isolated, and surrounded. Ramirez leaned over, sweat dripping down his dirt-streaked face. "Sir, we're low on mags. At this pace, we'll be dry in 10. Harris didn't answer immediately. He scanned the battlefield, his mind racing. Every commander dreaded this scenario. The mission compromised, the men cornered, and lives hanging in the balance. Retreat wasn't possible, surrender unthinkable. That left only one option: fight until there was nothing left to fight with. "Hold positions," Harris shouted. "We keep the hostages alive, no matter what." The SEALs dug in, their rifles barking methodically. Grenades lobbed into enemy clusters bought precious seconds. The compound shook with the force of detonations, dust filling the air. Every man knew they were facing overwhelming odds, but none showed fear. These were warriors who had trained for years to embrace impossible fights. Still, in the back of their minds, they each understood a truth none wanted to admit aloud. This might be their last stand. The battle dragged on, minutes stretching into lifetimes. The night sky flickered with muzzle flashes, screams mingling with the roar of gunfire. The hostages crouched low, shielding themselves behind the SEALs, eyes wide with terror. Every attempt to break through the perimeter was met with withering fire. The militants had the high ground, the numbers, and the element of surprise. Harris fired another burst, dropping a fighter climbing the outer wall, then ducked back as bullets peppered the stone above his head. His breathing grew heavy, his thoughts sharp. He had men depending on him, civilians depending on him, and yet, for the first time in his career, the weight of helplessness pressed down. Ammunition counters clicked low. Donovan shouted across the chaos, "We're running on fumes here." Harris clenched his jaw. Extraction was impossible. Survival was slipping away. As he prepared to order his men into one final desperate push, a strange thought struck him. Maybe this was how legends ended, not with victory, but with defiance. Then, as if fate itself intervened, the battlefield shifted. Gunfire roared from every direction, rattling the walls of the compound as if the earth itself had erupted. The SEALs were trapped in a cauldron of lead and smoke, the air thick with the acrid sting of burning powder. Every breath carried dust into their lungs, every second stretched into eternity. Pinned down behind cover, they returned fire with the precision drilled into them through years of relentless training. But precision couldn't overcome numbers, and numbers were what the enemy had. Lieutenant Harris ducked as a burst of automatic fire chewed through the wall above his head. Chunks of mud brick rained down, stinging his face as he pressed his back to the barrier. His ears rang with the sound of chaos, the steady rhythm of rifle fire and the sharp cracks of enemy snipers trying to box them in. He stole a glance around the corner. At least 30 hostiles had encircled the compound, maybe more. The militants moved with confidence, as though they had anticipated the SEALs' every step. "Lieutenant, right flank's getting hammered," Chief Donovan shouted, voice strained as he fired controlled bursts toward shadowy figures darting behind overturned vehicles. "Keep them suppressed," Harris barked, his throat raw from shouting over the cacophony. Donovan gritted his teeth, emptying another magazine. The SEALs were low on ammunition already, their silenced weapons discarded for louder firepower. Each man had begun counting rounds, conserving where possible, but the storm outside left no room for restraint. Near the center of the compound, Petty Officer Ramirez crouched beside the hostages, his protective stance like a shield. "We've got women and kids here, sir," he yelled. "They can't stay exposed much longer." Harris cursed under his breath. Every decision cut like a knife. Do they risk moving the hostages under fire, or hold position and pray for an opening? Neither option guaranteed survival. The enemy's strategy was clear. Keep them pinned, wear them down, and finish them once ammunition and strength ran out. An explosion rocked the east wall, showering debris across the courtyard. 2 hostages screamed, clutching each other as the ground trembled. Smoke billowed through the breach, silhouettes of advancing militants visible in the haze. Harris opened fire, his rifle barking, cutting down the first figures to emerge. But more pressed forward, relentless and undeterred. "They're breaching," Ramirez roared. "Cover the opening. Don't let them in," Harris ordered, repositioning his men to form a shield around the captives. The SEALs answered with a barrage of lead, their bullets carving through the smoke. Bodies fell, but still the enemy surged. The compound had become a death trap. Once meant to house enemies, its walls now imprisoned the rescuers. The SEALs' training emphasized adaptability, but even the sharpest minds couldn't conjure reinforcements out of thin air. Communication lines were dead, the radio frequencies scrambled by enemy jammers. Harris had tried 3 times already to reach higher command, each attempt met with hissing static. They were alone. He crouched low, switching magazines with trembling hands. His chest rose and fell rapidly, but his eyes remained sharp. He had seen firefights before: Afghanistan, Iraq, covert operations in places the public would never know. But this was different. This felt like a deliberate snare. "Sir," whispered Petty Officer Keller, the youngest on the team, crouched beside Harris. His eyes were wide but steady. "We're running out of time." Harris studied him for a moment, then nodded. "I know. We make time." A burst of fire from the north tower forced them both to duck again. Enemy marksmen had locked their position, pinning any movement. The SEALs were boxed in, forced to fight on the defensive, a role they were never meant to play for long. The frustration gnawed at Harris's gut. They weren't supposed to be prey, yet tonight, prey was exactly what they had become. Chief Donovan scrambled to Harris's side, his face smeared with dust and sweat. "We're down to 3 mags each, sir. Ramirez is already rationing. We can't sustain this. Suggestions?" Harris asked, though he already knew the answer. Donovan's eyes hardened. "We push out. Break their line. If we stay, we die here." Harris looked back at the hostages, families, civilians who had suffered enough already. Pushing out in this fire would mean exposing them to a storm of bullets. But keeping them huddled in the compound promised only delay before inevitable slaughter. Either choice carried blood. A round whistled past, grazing the wall inches from his head. Harris ducked instinctively, jaw tightening. His heart hammered with the weight of command. He wasn't just making choices for himself. Every life here, SEAL and civilian alike, was tethered to his decisions. The clock was ticking, and each tick was a bullet fired. Another explosion erupted, this time closer, collapsing a section of the outer wall. Dust engulfed the air, choking, blinding. Through the cloud, militants charged with raised rifles, shouting war cries. "Frag out," Ramirez shouted, tossing a grenade into the breach. The explosion ripped through the attackers, but more shadows moved behind them. The courtyard was now a maelstrom. The SEALs moved like dancers in death's choreography, firing, reloading, repositioning, shouting warnings, dragging hostages to cover. Every second demanded perfection. A single mistake would mean not just death but massacre. Then came the most chilling sound, a metallic click instead of a bang. Keller cursed, his weapon dry. He scrambled for another magazine, only to realize his last was already spent. Donovan tossed him one of his, but the grim truth was undeniable. The ammo was vanishing faster than the enemy. "We can't hold much longer," Donovan shouted, his voice cracking. Harris's mind raced, searching for solutions in a narrowing tunnel of options. He needed a miracle, something, anything, to shift the momentum. But miracles didn't belong in war. War only offered grit, blood, and silence. Pinned in the heart of the compound, Harris felt the weight of reality press down. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and outmaneuvered. The odds had always been against them, but now they weren't just bad, they were impossible. And still, the SEALs fought, because that was who they were. Harris looked around at his men, each one locked in the storm, refusing to break. Donovan's steady fire kept the northern flank from collapsing. Ramirez shielded the hostages with his own body, returning fire with lethal calm. Keller, though young, fought with desperate determination. These weren't just soldiers. They were brothers bound by trust, courage, and the unspoken promise never to abandon one another. Another wave of militants charged, their rifles flashing. The SEALs cut them down, but more followed, an endless tide. The compound shook again, riddled with the fury of war. Dust-clogged throats, sweat-stung eyes, yet still the SEALs held. But Harris knew it couldn't last. Ammunition was measured in minutes now, maybe less. Soon, they would be forced to fight with knives, then with fists, until nothing was left. As he fired another burst, cutting down an advancing enemy, Harris's thoughts drifted for just a second. Was this how their story would end? Not with triumph, but with defiance? He pushed the thought away, forcing focus back into his rifle sights. Then, just as despair threatened to take root, a sound cut through the battlefield. Different, distinct. A shot, clean, sharp, and not from any of his men. Harris froze, ears straining. Another shot followed, then another, each one striking true. Enemy fighters fell in confusion, cut down by an unseen hand. The battlefield was shifting. Something or someone had just entered the fight. The compound had become a furnace of fire and despair. Bullets tore through the night, striking walls, dirt, and flesh with merciless rhythm. The SEALs fought on, their magazines lighter with every exchange, their options shrinking by the second. The militants pressed forward, emboldened by sheer numbers, a wave determined to drown the small team in blood. Then it happened. A single piercing crack rang out across the battlefield. Not the rapid stutter of automatic rifles. Not the muffled thump of a grenade. This was different. Sharp, precise, deliberate. The sound carried authority, slicing through the chaos. An enemy fighter perched high in the north tower suddenly jerked back, a neat hole appearing through his forehead before his body tumbled lifeless into the courtyard below. For a moment, the battle seemed to pause. Both SEALs and militants froze, eyes instinctively drawn toward the fallen sniper. Lieutenant Harris blinked in disbelief. That shot hadn't come from his men. None of his operators were in position for such an angle. His headset was filled with static, still jammed, still dead. Whoever had fired that round wasn't part of his team. Before he could process the thought, another crack split the night. An enemy machine gunner, who had been raking the courtyard, collapsed, his weapon clattering uselessly from his grasp. Another militant tried to take cover behind a stack of barrels, only for a bullet to punch through the thin metal, striking him squarely in the chest. The militants staggered, confusion spreading like wildfire. They shouted in panic, pointing toward the ridge lines beyond the compound. Their confidence faltered as invisible death plucked them from the shadows one by one. Chief Donovan ducked beside Harris, eyes wide. "That's not us," he said, stating the obvious. "No," Harris muttered, watching as yet another hostile dropped from an impossibly long shot. "Someone's out there." The SEALs, weary from hours of trading fire, felt a surge of something they hadn't dared allow themselves. Hope. Whoever the shooter was, they weren't just skilled, they were extraordinary. Every shot landed with surgical precision, cutting down threats the SEALs themselves couldn't even see clearly. Who the hell is she? Ramirez muttered, eyes scanning the darkness as he reloaded. She? Donovan asked. Ramirez nodded, almost certain. The cadence, the patience behind the shots, it reminded him of a marksmanship style he'd seen before, during training exchanges with allied forces. It was instinct, not proof, but something about it felt deliberate, feminine. Another crack. This time, an RPG gunner on the eastern wall dropped before he could fire. The militants who had been preparing to storm the breach, scattered, suddenly vulnerable, suddenly prey. Their formations disintegrated, their discipline unraveling in the face of invisible execution. The SEALs seized the opening. Harris shouted orders, his voice cutting through the chaos. Push forward. Use the cover she's giving us. They moved, shifting positions, dragging hostages toward more secure corners of the compound. Each time they exposed themselves, another enemy fell, as if the mysterious shooter had anticipated their every move, clearing a path ahead of them. For Harris, the realization was both unsettling and comforting. Whoever this was, they weren't firing randomly. They were working with the SEALs, supporting them as if part of the team. Yet she remained unseen, hidden in the shadows beyond the battlefield. Keller, the youngest operator, ducked beside a wall, breathing heavily. Sir, this doesn't make sense. No allied sniper was in our briefing. Could she be CIA? Or... Harris cut him off. Doesn't matter. Right now, she's keeping us alive. That's all you need to know. Another crack, clean, controlled. A militant commander barking orders near the southern wall collapsed mid-sentence, silenced forever. The fighters around him faltered, their chain of command unraveling. Without leadership, their assault began to lose cohesion. The battle shifted from desperation to dominance. For the first time since the ambush began, the SEALs had breathing room. They could reload without panic, reposition without immediate death snapping at their heels. Yet the questions gnawed at them all. Who was she? Why was she here? And how did she know exactly when and where to intervene? The hostages, too, noticed the change. Huddled together, they looked toward the ridges beyond the compound, whispering prayers of gratitude for the unseen guardian who struck with godlike precision. To them, she wasn't just a sniper. She was salvation. Minutes dragged into half an hour of sustained firefight, but the momentum had clearly swung. The militants, once certain of victory, now scrambled to retreat. Each attempt to regroup ended in another lethal crack, another man falling. Panic replaced confidence, fear replacing their earlier fury. When the last of the attackers fled into the night, silence fell across the battlefield. Smoke hung heavy in the air, broken bodies scattered across the ground. The SEALs stood in disbelief, weapons raised, waiting for another wave that never came. Breathing hard, Harris lowered his rifle. He scanned the ridgeline where the shots had come from, but saw nothing. No movement, no silhouette, no sign of life. Whoever she was, she had disappeared as silently as she had arrived. Chief Donovan exhaled slowly, shaking his head. That wasn't just a good shooter. That was world class. I've never seen marksmanship like that in my life. Ramirez spat dust from his mouth, nodding in agreement. She saved every one of us. No doubt about it. Keller glanced around nervously, as if half expecting her to reveal herself. Then why stay hidden? If she's on our side, why not come down here? No one had an answer. Harris felt a chill creep into his bones, despite the adrenaline still pumping through his veins. This wasn't ordinary. This wasn't chance. Whoever she was, she had chosen this moment, this battlefield, this team. And now she was gone. He knew one thing for certain. Their mission had changed. The hostages were safe for now. The SEALs had survived the impossible, but questions loomed larger than the desert sky. Somewhere in the darkness, a ghost with a rifle had altered their fate, and Harris intended to find out why. The battlefield had fallen into an uneasy silence. Smoke drifted lazily through the broken compound, its tendrils catching the pale moonlight. Empty casings glittered like fallen stars across the dirt, and the acrid stench of gunpowder clung to the air. The hostages huddled together, their frightened whispers carried on the wind. For the SEALs, the sudden quiet was almost unsettling. Minutes earlier, they had been drowning in chaos. Now, the gunfire was gone, the militants scattered or dead. The silence did not feel like victory. It felt like mystery. Lieutenant Harris stood slowly, scanning the ridge lines with narrowed eyes. He expected movement, some hint of their rescuer, but the ridges were barren under the cold glow of the moon. Whoever had been there had vanished. Chief Donovan joined him, rifle still raised out of habit. "You saw those shots, Lieutenant. Clean. Coordinated. That wasn't luck." "No," Harris replied, voice low. "That was someone trained. Someone good." "Good?" Donovan scoffed. "That wasn't good. That was perfect. Whoever she is, she made Tier 1 look like amateurs." Harris didn't answer immediately. He was still trying to process the surreal nature of what had just happened. His men were alive. The hostages were alive. And it wasn't because of their own plan. It was because of a phantom sniper who had chosen to intervene. Ramirez approached, his face smeared with dirt and sweat, eyes glinting with curiosity. "Sir, I caught a glimpse." "Just for a second." Harris turned sharply. "A glimpse of what?" "Not what." "Who?" Ramirez said. "She was on the western ridge. Silhouette against the stars. Slender frame. Scoped rifle. Moved like, I don't know, like it was second nature. No hesitation. No wasted movement." Keller, the youngest SEAL, looked incredulous. "You're telling me you saw her? You're sure it was a woman?" Ramirez nodded firmly. "Positive. And before you ask, no, I didn't imagine it. Whoever she is, she knew exactly what she was doing." The men fell silent for a moment, absorbing his words. The idea of a lone woman operating independently in this war-torn region wasn't impossible. But it was improbable. Every operator they knew of was accounted for. No intel briefing had mentioned her existence. And yet, she had been there, delivering shot after shot with unerring accuracy. The hostages stirred, their relief giving way to nervous energy. One of them, an older man with trembling hands, pointed toward the ridge. "It was her," he whispered. "I saw her silhouette. Like an angel. She saved us." The SEALs exchanged uneasy glances. Angel. That wasn't how soldiers described snipers. But for the hostages, the description made sense. "Lieutenant," Donovan said, breaking the silence, "we can't ignore this. Whoever she is, she's in the EU. She knows how to fight, and she's not with us." "That's a problem." "Or a blessing," Ramirez countered. "If she hadn't been here, we'd all be dead." Harris raised a hand to silence them. The debate was pointless. What mattered now was finding her, or at least understanding what game she was playing. He didn't like mysteries on the battlefield. "Eyes open," he ordered. "She's out there, and if she wants us to find her, she'll let us. Move the hostages to the interior. Rearm and regroup. We're not done here." The SEALs complied, though their movements carried a weight of unease. They had faced enemies, traps, and impossible odds before, but never this. Never an ally who wasn't supposed to exist. Hours passed in tense quiet. The moon sank lower, shadows stretching across the compound. The SEALs took turns on watch, their eyes constantly flicking to the ridges. No more shots rang out. No movement betrayed her position. For all they knew, She was long gone. It wasn't until dawn began to streak the horizon with pale orange light that Harris saw her. He had been scanning the ridge for the 100th time when a figure appeared, barely visible against the breaking light. She moved with an ease that belied the terrain, stepping from rock to rock like water flowing over stone. The scope of her rifle glinted briefly in the rising sun, a flicker that confirmed her identity. "There," Harris muttered. "West Ridge." The others followed his gaze, rifles instinctively raised, though none fired. They knew instinctively she wasn't a threat. Not to them. She paused on the ridge, standing tall, her posture calm. Even from a distance, Harris could sense her confidence. She was no amateur, no freelancer fumbling her way through combat. She was trained. And not just trained, refined. Whoever she was, she carried herself like someone who had lived in the shadows for years. Keller whispered, "Should we hail her?" Harris shook his head. "Not yet." As if hearing the question, the woman raised a hand slowly, deliberately. A gesture. Not a wave, not a greeting, more like acknowledgement. Then, just as quickly, she lowered it, turned, and disappeared behind the ridge. "Damn," Donovan muttered. "She's toying with us." "No," Harris said, his voice more thoughtful than frustrated. "She's testing us. Letting us know she's real, but not ready to be known." Ramirez exhaled slowly. "Unknown shooter," he said softly, almost reverently. The phrase hung in the air like smoke. It was fitting. She was unknown, yet undeniable. And for reasons beyond their understanding, she had chosen to fight for them. The SEALs spent the next hours preparing the hostages for extraction, but the weight of the encounter lingered. Every time they glanced toward the ridges, they half expected her to return. Every shadow looked like a silhouette. Every breeze carried the phantom of her presence. When command finally re-established contact and ordered the SEALs to move toward the extraction point, Harris gave one last look at the western ridge. The woman was gone. Perhaps she had been gone for hours. But her presence clung to the battlefield like a ghost. Who was she? Rogue operative? Covert ally? Something else entirely? Harris didn't know. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. Their mission had changed the moment her first bullet flew. And her story, whatever it was, had only just begun to intertwine with theirs. The dawn stretched across the desert in thin streaks of gold, washing over the compound's ruins like a cruel reminder of what had nearly happened. The SEALs moved quickly, guiding the frightened hostages into formation, their movements disciplined but urgent. Lieutenant Harris could feel time pressing against him like a vice. The militants had retreated, but he knew better than to believe the fight was over. They would regroup. They would return. And this time, reinforcements might double their numbers. "Load up," Harris ordered. "We move now." Chief Donovan ushered the hostages toward the breach in the wall, his voice steady despite the weariness etched across his face. "Stay close. Eyes forward. Don't stop unless I tell you." The civilians, still trembling from the night's horror, obeyed without hesitation. Some carried children. Others clutched each other's hands, so tightly their knuckles turned white. They weren't soldiers. They were survivors, and survival meant trusting the men who had pulled them from the jaws of death. The SEALs formed a protective shell, weapons raised, eyes scanning every ridge and hollow. The desert was vast, unforgiving, and filled with places for enemies to lie in wait. Harris had led countless extractions before, but none under circumstances like this. Their comms were only partially restored, still disrupted by the enemy's jammers. Air support was on standby, but too far to respond quickly. For now, it was just them, and maybe, if fortune allowed, the phantom sniper who had saved them. Ramirez jogged up beside Harris, his rifle slung low. "Sir, we don't have enough ammo to handle another wave." If they regroup before we reach Exfil, we're done. Harris nodded grimly. And we make it before they do. No mistakes. The desert stretched before them, endless dunes rolling toward the horizon. Their extraction point was 5 clicks east, a barren plateau marked for helicopter landing. 5 clicks didn't sound like much on paper, but with hostages in tow, low ammunition, and enemy forces hunting them, it felt like a lifetime away. They had barely cleared the compound when the first crack of rifle fire split the silence. Bullets struck the sand at their feet, sending plumes of dust skyward. The hostages screamed, dropping instinctively. Contact rear. Donovan barked, spinning and firing toward the ridgeline. Shadows moved there, militants reassembling for pursuit. The SEALs formed a rear guard, laying down suppressive fire while Harris pulled the hostages forward. Go, 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 he shouted. The militants advanced with renewed fury, their shouts echoing across the desert. But then, as before, another sound entered the fray. A shot, precise and merciless. An enemy fighter dropped mid-sprint, his body tumbling across the sand. Another crack, another man down. The advancing line wavered, confusion spreading. She's back, Ramirez muttered, relief softening his tone. The mysterious sniper had returned, and once again, her presence changed everything. Each time the SEALs needed an opening, a hostile fell. Each time the militants tried to flank, they were cut down before getting into position. It was as if she could see the entire battlefield at once, her rifle carving a path for the team step by step. Harris adjusted his pace, moving the group in sync with her cover fire. He didn't know how she was communicating. She never spoke, never signaled, but her timing was flawless, as though she anticipated his decisions before he made them. Who the hell is she? Keller whispered, his voice a mix of awe and disbelief, as another distant target crumpled. Doesn't matter, Harris said. She's keeping us alive. Focus on moving. The hostages, though terrified, sensed the invisible guardian watching over them. They moved with newfound urgency, each distant crack of the rifle reassuring them that fate hadn't abandoned them yet. Some whispered prayers, others sobbed quietly, but all kept moving, driven by the certainty that someone out there was fighting for them. The militants refused to give up. They pressed harder, attacking from ridges, gullies, and dunes, their numbers swelling with each passing minute. Yet every assault crumbled under the sniper's relentless precision. The SEALs joined in, coordinating with her unseen rhythm, covering angles she couldn't, creating a symphony of lethal efficiency. By the time they reached the halfway mark to Exfil, the battlefield had shifted into a deadly dance. Harris marveled at her skill, the way she struck high-value targets first, dismantling the enemy's strategy before it could unfold. Commanders, machine gunners, RPG carriers, all dropped before they could act. She wasn't just firing at random. She was orchestrating the fight. But all gave way to suspicion. Harris couldn't ignore the questions gnawing at his mind. How did she know about the mission? Why intervene now, at this precise moment? Was she an ally gone rogue, or an independent operator with her own agenda? And if she could vanish as easily as she appeared, what guarantee did they have that she would stay until the end? The extraction plateau finally came into view, its barren expanse like salvation on the horizon. Harris pushed the team harder, knowing the window was closing. Already, enemy trucks were visible in the distance, headlights bouncing as they tore across the desert to intercept. Pick it up, Donovan yelled, firing short bursts to keep the pursuers at bay. The militants drew closer, their vehicles kicking up clouds of dust. Harris's heart pounded. They wouldn't reach the plateau in time. The hostages couldn't outrun trucks, and the SEALs couldn't fight a mechanized assault with dwindling ammunition. Then came 3 rapid cracks. The lead truck swerved violently, its driver slumping over the wheel. It flipped, rolling across the sand in a plume of fire and smoke. Another crack disabled the second truck. Its engine block shattered. The third tried to maneuver around, but was hit before it could accelerate, tires exploding under her bullets. The desert fell silent again, save for the cries of panicked militants scrambling from burning wrecks. The hostages cheered through tears, their fear momentarily replaced by raw gratitude. Harris didn't cheer. He just stared at the ridges, scanning for her silhouette. He caught it, just for a second, perched high on a dune, rifle steady, body still. Even at this distance, he could sense the calm in her movements, and mastery in her craft. She wasn't celebrating. She wasn't acknowledging them. She was just doing what she came to do. As the helicopters finally roared overhead, kicking sand into whirling clouds, the SEALs began loading the hostages. Harris held back, his eyes still fixed on the ridge. He raised a hand in salute, a silent acknowledgement. She didn't respond. She simply lowered her rifle, turned, and walked away into the endless desert. Chief Donovan approached, shaking his head in disbelief. "She saved us again, sir." And just like before, gone. No name, no face, no trace. Ramirez muttered softly, almost to himself. "Unknown shooter." The words lingered as Harris climbed aboard the chopper, the engines roaring, the desert shrinking beneath them. The hostages were safe. The team had survived. But the mystery remained, heavier than the rifles in their hands. Whoever she wasn't just an ally. She was something more, a ghost in human form, a force of war that appeared when needed most, then vanished without explanation. And Harris knew one thing for certain. This wouldn't be the last time he'd hear the crack of her rifle. The helicopter thumped across the desert sky, its rotors chopping the dawn into pieces. Inside the bird, the SEALs sat in silence, the adrenaline of battle fading into exhaustion. The hostages huddled near the back, some asleep from sheer relief, others staring blankly at the floor, as if afraid to believe they were truly safe. Lieutenant Harris leaned against the cabin wall, helmet in his lap, eyes fixed on the horizon rushing past. He wasn't thinking about the mission report, or the chain of command waiting with questions he couldn't answer. His mind was on the woman at the rifle, the phantom who had rewritten their fate with each pull of her trigger. Ramirez broke the silence first. "Sir," he said softly, "none of this makes sense. Who operates like that? Alone, in this region, without backup or exfil? And why?" Donovan grunted. "Mercenary, maybe. Hired gun with a conscience." "No," Harris said, his voice firm. "That wasn't a mercenary. I've seen mercenaries fight. They don't waste time saving strangers." Keller, still wide-eyed from the ordeal, leaned forward. "Then what was she? CIA? Delta? Some ghost program we don't know about?" Harris didn't answer. The truth was, he had no answers, only questions. What gnawed at him most was her silence. She hadn't asked for recognition, hadn't even approached them after saving their lives twice. She simply acted, then vanished, like her only purpose was to alter the outcome before disappearing into myth. The helicopter landed at a forward operating base, and the hostages were whisked away by medics. The SEALs filed into a briefing room, their faces shadowed by fatigue and unanswered questions. A commander waited for them, expression stern. "Good work on the extraction," he said. "Hostages are alive. Mission success." "Mission success?" Donovan echoed, incredulous. "With respect, sir, if it weren't for an unknown shooter, we'd be zipped into body bags right now." The commander's eyes narrowed. "Unknown shooter?" Harris spoke up. "She was real. A sniper, female, operated independently. Without her intervention, we'd never have made it." The commander exchanged a look with the intel officer beside him. "We have no record of Allied assets in your AO," the officer said flatly. "No operatives, no covert teams, no freelance support." "Are you suggesting a hostile saved you?" "Not hostile," Harris said, his tone unyielding. "She neutralized hostiles. She covered our retreat. She saved the hostages." The officer leaned back, unconvinced. "Maybe you are under stress." Hallucinations under fire aren't unusual. That word, hallucinations, ignited a spark of anger in Harris. He slammed his helmet onto the table. "We don't hallucinate precision shots at 600 meters. We don't imagine trucks flipping over because someone nailed the driver on the first round. This wasn't in our heads. She's real." The room fell quiet. The commander finally said, "Until we have proof, this stays off record. No mention in official reports." "Do I make myself clear?" The SEALs exchanged uneasy glances, but none protested. Orders were orders. Yet the silence imposed on them only deepened the mystery. That night, as the others slept in their bunks, Harris sat alone outside the barracks. The desert stretched endlessly beyond the wire, quiet under a canopy of stars. He couldn't shake the feeling she was still out there, watching. His thoughts were interrupted by the faintest crunch of sand. He stiffened, hand instinctively moving toward his sidearm. From the shadows beyond the perimeter, a figure emerged. She stepped into the moonlight with the same calm grace he had seen on the ridge. Tall, lean, face hidden beneath a scarf, rifle slung across her back. The unknown shooter. Harris rose slowly, every muscle tense. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice low but steady. She didn't answer immediately. She studied him, her gaze sharp even through the shadows. Then, for the first time, she spoke. "Unknown shooter," she said softly, her accent impossible to place. She paused, letting the words hang in the air before adding, "Identify yourself." The phrase struck him harder than any bullet. It wasn't a demand for his name. It was something else. A challenge. A question of loyalty. Perhaps even a code. Harris took a cautious step closer. "You saved my men. You saved those hostages. If you're on our side, why hide?" Her eyes flickered, unreadable. "Not all wars are fought for flags," she said. "Some are fought for balance. What does that mean?" He pressed. She tilted her head slightly, as though measuring how much truth to reveal. "You were meant to succeed tonight. That's all you need to know." Before he could ask more, she stepped back into the shadows. Harris moved forward quickly, but when he reached the edge of the light, she was gone. Vanished, as if the desert had swallowed her whole. He stood there for a long time, the night air cool against his face, her words echoing in his mind. "Unknown shooter. Identify yourself." Back inside, Harris scribbled the phrase into his field notebook. It wasn't for the report. It would never make the report. But he needed it written, needed to remember exactly how she had said it. Because deep down, he knew this wasn't over. She hadn't just saved them. She had marked them. When he returned to the barracks, Ramirez stirred from his bunk. "Everything all right, LT?" Harris hesitated before answering. "Yeah," he said finally, though the truth weighed heavily in his chest. "Everything's fine." But it wasn't fine. A ghost had walked into their war, saved them, and left behind only questions. Harris knew she would appear again. And next time, the choice she forced upon them might be far greater than survival. The following days passed in a blur of debriefs, paperwork, and endless security checks. On the surface, the mission was filed as a success. Hostages rescued, team intact, enemy forces disrupted. But beneath the clean official narrative, tension simmered among the SEALs. Every man on the team carried the same unspoken thought. The mission had not been theirs alone. Lieutenant Harris knew it better than anyone. His field notebook lay open on the metal desk in his quarters. The words "unknown shooter," "identify yourself" scrawled in block letters. He found himself staring at them, night after night, as though the phrase might rearrange itself into meaning. Ramirez was the first to voice what they were all thinking. Sitting in the mess hall, he leaned across the table, lowering his voice. "LT, I've been digging. Not official channels, just whispers. Guys who know guys. There's talk about a program, blacker than black. Buried so deep Congress doesn't even know it exists." Harris raised an eyebrow. "And you think she's part of it?" Ramirez nodded. "I can't prove it. But the way she moved, the way she operated, that wasn't freelance. That was doctrine. Our doctrine. Only refined. Like someone took SEAL training and stripped it down to pure instinct." Keller, listening nearby, chimed in. "I heard the same. A ghost unit. Operators trained off the books. People who officially don't exist. They deploy them when even we can't be on record." Donovan shook his head. "Ghost units are rumors. Campfire stories for bored recruits. You're chasing shadows." But Harris wasn't so sure. The words of the woman on the perimeter replayed in his mind. "Not all wars are fought for flags. Some are fought for balance." That wasn't the language of a mercenary. It was the language of someone bound to a cause too secret to name. 2 nights later, Harris was summoned to the operations tent by an intelligence officer he didn't recognize, a man in civilian clothes, with eyes that studied him like a puzzle piece being forced into place. "Lieutenant Harris," the man said without preamble, "I understand you had unusual circumstances during your last mission." Harris kept his tone guarded. "My team completed the objective. The details are in the report," the man smirked faintly. "Not all the details." He slid a thin folder across the table. "Your mystery sniper. You're not the first team to cross paths with her." Harris opened the folder. Inside were grainy photographs, captured from drones or long-range optics. The same silhouette appeared in each. A woman on a ridge, rifle poised. Different countries. Different battlefields. Always the same posture. Always disappearing before anyone could close in. His pulse quickened. "Who is she?" The man's smirk vanished. "Classified. That's not an answer." The officer leaned closer. "You want the truth, Lieutenant? You're better off not knowing. What matters is this. She's not your enemy. But she's not your ally either. If she intervenes, it's because someone somewhere decided balance required it." "Balance," Harris repeated. The word sent a chill down his spine. The officer gathered the folder back into his briefcase. "Forget you saw this. Focus on your missions. And if she crosses your path again, remember, she doesn't work for you. She works for the shadows." With that, the man left, leaving Harris staring at the empty table. Back in the barracks, Harris shared what he'd seen with Donovan, Ramirez, and Keller. The reactions were mixed: disbelief, awe, suspicion. "So she's real," Donovan muttered. "And she's been playing guardian angel across multiple battlefields. But why us? Why now?" Ramirez leaned forward. "Maybe it's not about us. Maybe it's about something bigger. A war we don't even know we're fighting." The thought settled heavily in the room. None of them liked the idea of being pawns in a game they couldn't see. A week later, during a training exercise in the mountains, the mystery deepened. The SEALs were moving through rugged terrain when Keller froze, raising his hand. "LT," he whispered, "we're being watched." Harris scanned the ridgeline, heart hammering. And there she was. Just for a heartbeat, a slender figure silhouetted against the sky, rifle in hand. She didn't fire, didn't move. She simply watched. The team reacted instantly, fanning out, trying to flank her position. But by the time they reached the ridge, she was gone. In her place, carved into the dirt, were 3 words scratched with a knife. Identify yourself first. The message hit Harris like a riddle wrapped in steel. She wasn't taunting them. She was answering him, continuing the conversation that had begun outside the barracks. That night, Harris couldn't sleep. He sat alone, turning the words over in his mind. If she was part of some ghost program, why reveal herself at all? Why risk exposure by leaving a message? Unless she wanted them to find her. Unless she was guiding them toward something bigger. The next day, Ramirez approached Harris with something that made his blood run cold. A classified training manual, leaked years ago, supposedly from a canceled program. Its name, Project Orion. The manual described operatives designed for deniability, men and women, pulled from various branches, trained beyond the limits of standard doctrine, and erased from official records. Their mission, intervene only when global stability hung in the balance. One passage stood out: operatives must maintain anonymity. When identified, protocol dictates immediate extraction or elimination. Code phrase: unknown shooter, identify yourself. Harris read the line 3 times, his hands tightening on the paper. It wasn't just something she had said. It was part of her doctrine. She's Orion, Ramirez whispered. Has to be. But if that were true, then she wasn't just a rogue sniper. She was part of something buried, so deep even the SEALs weren't supposed to know it existed. Harris closed the manual, his chest heavy. The pieces were aligning, but the picture they formed was darker than he had imagined. Whoever she was tethered to a world of shadows where allegiance wasn't to nations, but to something far more dangerous, the illusion of balance. And Harris realized with a sinking certainty, the next time she appeared, it wouldn't be as their savior. It would be as the arbiter of choices no SEAL team wanted to face. The mountains burned with the copper glow of a setting sun. Lieutenant Harris and his team moved in silence through the narrow valley, their boots crunching on loose gravel. This was no training run. This was real. Intel had flagged a convoy carrying chemical weapons components bound for insurgents. Stopping it wasn't optional. If the shipment moved across the border, cities would be at risk. But Harris felt the weight of something more than the mission pressing on him. For weeks, the sniper had haunted him like a shadow stitched to his soul. She was always just beyond reach, appearing in fragments, vanishing before answers could be grasped. He had begun to wonder if she would show again, or if her chapter in their lives had already closed. Convoy ahead, Donovan whispered, crouched at the ridge line. Dust plumes rose from the narrow road below, 3 trucks grinding forward under armed escort. Set positions, Harris ordered. The SEALs fanned out, rifles ready, eyes cold with focus. Then, before Harris could issue the go signal, it happened. A crack split the valley. One of the escort vehicles jerked violently, its driver slumped over, the vehicle skidding into the rocks. The militants shouted, confusion breaking their formation. The SEALs froze, exchanging wide-eyed glances. It was her. She's here, Ramirez breathed, his voice tinged with both relief and unease. Another shot rang out, clean and merciless. A gunner toppled from his truck before he could man the mounted weapon. The convoy scrambled, half its strength collapsing before the SEALs had fired a single round. Move, Harris barked, seizing the moment. His team surged forward, unleashing precise bursts. With the phantom sniper dismantling the enemy's heavy weapons, the SEALs cut through the remaining fighters with brutal efficiency. Within minutes, the convoy was neutralized, the trucks secured. But Harris didn't celebrate. His gaze swept the ridges, searching for her. And there, high above, framed by the crimson sky, she stood. Silhouette sharp, rifle slung, watching. This time, Harris didn't hesitate. He climbed the rocky slope, his breath ragged, boots scraping stone. The others shouted after him, but he ignored them. He wasn't letting her vanish again. By the time he reached the ridge, the light was fading fast. She was waiting, standing as still as the mountains themselves. Close, she was no myth. Dust clung to her gear. Sweat glistened on her brow. But her eyes, sharp, steady, unflinching, carried the weight of a life lived in shadows. "Unknown shooter," Harris said, chest heaving. "Identify yourself." For a long moment, silence stretched between them. The wind carried only the smell of gunpowder and desert dust. Then she spoke, her voice low but resolute. "I already have. You just don't understand the answer." Harris frowned. "You've been following us. Saving us. Why? What do you want from us?" Her lips curved, not quite a smile. "Want? Nothing. I do what must be done. Where balance tilts, I intervene. Where chaos grows, I cut it down." "That's not an answer," Harris pressed. "You're not CIA. You're not on any record. So who do you serve?" Her gaze flicked to the horizon, as if searching for something beyond his comprehension. "I serve the balance. Not nations. Not flags. The world is a scale, always tipping, always fragile. My task is to steady it, unseen." Harris shook his head. "That's not a mission. That's a sentence. You can't fight for ghosts forever." Finally, her eyes softened, just slightly. "Neither can you. You just don't know it yet." He stepped closer. "At least tell me your name. Something real." For the first time, her composure faltered. A shadow of memory crossed her face, a flicker of humanity behind the steel. Then she whispered, almost too quiet to hear, "Names are for the living. I don't live. I remain." Before Harris could reply, the distant thump of helicopter rotors grew louder. His team was signaling extraction. He turned for just a second, and when he looked back, she was gone. No trace, no sound. Only empty ridgeline and the fading echo of her words. Harris stood there until Donovan's voice crackled in his earpiece. "LT, we're wheels up. Where the hell are you?" He descended the ridge slowly, his chest heavy. The convoy was destroyed, the mission secured. But the victory felt hollow, unfinished. On the flight back, Harris opened his field notebook. He wrote a single line beneath the earlier words. Unknown shooter. Legend, not ghost. Weeks later, back on new soil, the team sat through endless debriefs. Officials dismissed the mysterious sniper as fog of war, an illusion of adrenaline and confusion. The SEALs said nothing. What could they say? That an invisible guardian had appeared out of nowhere, fought alongside them, and dissolved into myth? The brass didn't want legends. They wanted reports that fit cleanly into files. But among the SEALs, the truth lingered. Ramirez sometimes muttered about her during late-night watches. Keller claimed he still felt her eyes on him in crowded streets. Even Donovan, skeptic to the core, admitted one night, "I don't know if she was real or not. But if she wasn't, then we owe our lives to a ghost." Harris said nothing. He carried her words with him like a scar. Not all wars are fought for flags. Some are fought for balance. Years later, when Harris had long since retired, stories began surfacing from other battlefields. Different units. Different wars. The same silhouette on a ridge. The same single shot that turned defeat into survival. Always unconfirmed. Always unexplained. And so the legend of the unknown shooter grew. Soldiers whispered her name like a prayer in foxholes and safe houses. Some said she was a guardian angel. Others claimed she was a specter of war itself. But for Harris and his team, she was real. flesh and blood. A woman who had appeared in their darkest hour, asked nothing, revealed nothing, and then vanished into the folds of history. Not a ghost, not a myth, something in between. The unknown shooter. And her question would forever echo in the hearts of the men she saved. Identify yourself.